My name is Kurt Strantz. I'm the president of Pinnacle Mortgage, and we decided to host this event a few weeks ago, ironically before the coronavirus started snowballing. And BJ Perry introduced me to a group of folks that are from the Committee of the Present Threat of China. And we sat down over some coffee and listened to some of the things that they were bringing to our attention. And I thought it was very interesting information that should be presented to a much larger group, which is how we came about to this event tonight. So I'd like to invite Jay Lucas up from the Committee of the Present Threat of China, and we'll start our program.
Thank you, Kurt, and thank you, Holly. Really great of you to welcome us tonight and host this event. And I also want to say thank you to the band. That was really pretty good, I thought. So I think we've got a very special evening for everybody tonight, and we're going to go into some depth. And you're going to hear some things that other people have not heard before, and we're going to have some time for questions and answers as well. But let me just take it back a couple of steps here and explain what this is all about. And for me and my wife Karen, this journey around China, this present part of it started about 3 months ago when I was spending time with both Frank Gaffney, who you'll hear from tonight, and Roger Robinson. And they were beginning an idea that I thought was a very, very important idea for us as Americans, for us in terms of protecting our freedom. And here's how they began to describe it. They said, back in the 1970s, there was a threat. The existential threat for the United States was the Soviet Union. And many people thought that there would be détente, we'd have this nuclear standoff, and that was permanent. But a small group of people got together. They called themselves the Committee on the Present Danger. And they said, there's a better way. We think that we can actually defeat the Soviet Union. And they began to develop a strategy. And that strategy made its way into the Reagan administration, and both Frank Gaffney and Roger were key architects of that strategy. And they began to describe a vision about China. And it really resonated with me because I have this belief that China really is the existential threat for us in our time. Not only in terms of military strength, economic, the espionage that's going on, the stealing of our intellectual property, the degree to which we're dependent upon their supply chain for critical medical supplies, and much, much more. And we as Americans need to be really alert to this. And here was their idea. Their idea was, let's form a second committee. Let's form a committee, we'll call it the Committee on the Present Danger China. That resonated with me. I said, let's get behind this. Let's really step in and make this our cause. Because there are 1.4 billion people in China who don't enjoy the same kind of freedom we do here in the United States. They need to be liberated, and we need to combat this existential threat with China. So we've done that. The committee has been formed. We're in the midst now of doing some very interesting things to alert people around the country. We've held fundraisers. We've now want to thank Kurt and Holly for tonight. We've been up here in New Hampshire. This is our second trip. And they're going to tell you a little bit about some of our strategies tonight. So first, I'd like to introduce Frank Gaffney. Frank is, I'll say one thing about Frank. He's a great guy, and he's very, very modest. But in his background, one of the things he has done is that he is really, according to, this is actually in a speech by President Reagan, who said, Frank Gaffney, I credit him with a strategy behind the anti-ballistic missile defense system, sometimes known as Star Wars, in the 1980s. So I want to introduce Frank, and he's also been the founder of the Center for Security Policy. He's a close friend, and Frank, please come on up.
Well, this isn't modesty, this is just an important correction. Jay, that story gets better every time you tell it. And getting those words from President Reagan would have been my life's dream. But A nice thing that was said about me by Charles Krauthammer, the late wonderful columnist, was that they should call our missile defenses Gaffneys because I was such a champion of them after I left the Reagan administration. So that's close, isn't it? I mean, reasonably close, just to be actually accurate. I am thrilled to be here. We're back here, thanks to Kurt, thanks to wherever Kurt is. Well, there you are. Thank you for having the vision to say, let's go do this with some of your team. Thanks to Jay, of course, who brought us together with BJ and his team back in the back. Thank you, gentlemen. All of you are, you know, the kind of people who don't just have live free or die on your license plate. You believe it, you live it. And that's why we wanted to be here, because this is a moment, as Jay was just saying, in which that is actually on the line. Our freedoms are actually on the line. In a way that, having been through the Reagan period, having worked, as did Roger, for the president, I didn't actually architect the strategy as much as Roger did, but I had a hand in executing it, that's for sure, in the Pentagon. The threat posed by the Soviet Union in the darkest days of the Cold War pales into insignificance compared to what we're facing right now. And we're going to talk to you at some length about why that is so and what we can do about it, which is really the point. It's not just to scare you, it's not just to alarm you or even incense you, it's to say, join us in doing what we can to ensure that we're able to pass on to our children, and as Reagan used to say, our children's children, the freedoms that we take for granted, most of us, because they are on the line. Let me tell you why. They're on the line because today's existential threat to freedom has set about in a determined, disciplined, patient way to supplant us as the world's dominant power and recast the world, recast the nations of the world, recast the institutions, many of which we helped put into place after World War II, with what they call Chinese characteristics. And the trouble with Chinese characteristics, if you weren't paying attention to this before the coronavirus, I suspect, like an awful lot of other Americans, you are now. Chinese characteristics are horrific. And this is not a racist comment, this is not a xenophobic comment, this is an objective statement of fact. And here's just one example. A government that has now put into place the most comprehensive system for surveilling, monitoring, and controlling people in the history of the world. Something that would make George Orwell's fantasy of 1984 look like, I don't know, the founders, constitutional Congress. Because it is so oppressive. For example, if they did, and I'm frankly skeptical, but let's just say for the purposes of this discussion, they did succeed in crushing the coronavirus after letting it run rampant for a couple of months. They did it, and they're claiming they did it by bringing to bear surveillance technologies, including things like cameras, all over the country, hundreds of millions of them. Roger will tell you more about where they come from. And facial recognition technology, and speech recognition technology, and gait recognition technology. And exotic things like quantum computing, whatever that is, powerful, supercomputing generation upon generation. Artificial intelligence, data mining, to essentially be able to monitor what everybody is doing virtually 24/7. What they're buying, what they're writing, what they're saying, what they are otherwise doing, perhaps jaywalking, perhaps saying something against the party. Whatever it is all now being computed and assessed and translated into something that's called the social credit system, whereby you can get a good social credit rating by playing ball with the party, doing what it tells you to do. And you can not play ball, but be punished for it in real time. Such that if your social credit score system, for example, doesn't meet the standards that the party expects, and of course when I talk about the party, I'm not talking about the Republican Party, I'm not talking about the Democrat, I'm talking about the Chinese Communist Party, the one party in China. And that party will assess you have deviated, and you will not be allowed to travel. You will not be allowed to rent an apartment. You will not be allowed to go to a certain school or your children. You may not be able to get a job or keep the one you have. You may, in short, find yourself unable to feed your family. I mean, these are the sorts of coercive techniques that sound pretty bad in the abstract, but we watched them in practice here in recent days. To the point where, you may have heard these statistics, I mean, it's mind-boggling, but 100 million Chinese were locked down in their place of abode. In some cases, they went to the extreme measure of actually sealing the doors so as to ensure that you could not get out of your apartment. There are videos on YouTube that you can listen to if you can stand it, of people going out on the balconies if they have them, or just out the open windows of their apartments, screaming because of the nightmare that had become their lives, being locked in these apartments. How did they do that? They did that by applying these same tools and techniques. And here's the real kicker, folks. You're going to hear more about this, I suspect, in the days to come. They're now taking credit for having crushed the disease as part of a marketing campaign to try to sell this social credit system to other countries around the world, so that they too can use it for health care management. But oh, by the way, also use it to control populations. So when you think about this, it's really not too much of a stretch to realize that what is at stake here is freedom. Now you may say, well, that wouldn't happen here. Are you sure? Are you sure that even in states like this, where people do prize freedom, it won't ever happen here? Well, just as an example, thought experiment. One of the companies that the Chinese Communist Party has been using as part of its build-out of its surveillance state apparatus, its intelligence collection capabilities, its power projection, is something called Huawei. Has anybody ever heard of Huawei? Huawei is the world's largest telecommunications conglomerate. It is essentially a Chinese state-owned enterprise, though it professes to be private sector, but it's basically the Chinese Communist Party's means of spreading around the world wireless technology. Now, at the moment on offer, is 5G, fifth generation wireless technology. And they're making tremendous progress in insinuating this technology into lots of countries, including some with whom we are closely allied, like Great Britain, for example. And that, by the way, is happening over the adamant objections of our country, our government, which has gone to them and said, look, you're one of our most intimate allies. We share with you everything we've got in terms of intelligence. We call you one of the Five Eyes, which are basically the Anglosphere countries that have been closely partnered up since World War II, in some cases before, but have been particularly active in fighting against these totalitarian threats. And we've said to the Brits, you can't let Huawei into your digital networks without making it impossible for us to share intelligence with you. Why is that? Because we can't share it with you without sharing it with the Chinese Communist Party. Because the feed of anything that they own and operate or run or supply telecommunications equipment for, or what have you, will wind up being collected and fed into that same basic maw of the processing and the computing and the analyzing, and used for their purposes against us, among others. Because in the end, let's face it, we are the impediment to the realization of their global ambitions, right? Among the other applications of all of this is the oppression of, the estimates vary, 1 to 3 million Uyghur Muslims in Western China, Xinjiang. They're not the only faith minority that is being persecuted, to be sure, but this one is now being reduced to the population of concentration camps. 1,000 or so of them have been built, apparently, in Western China. And here's a kicker, folks, I'm trying to really help you appreciate the character of a regime that would do this to its own people, point to which I'm going to return. When they mostly, not exclusively, but they mostly send young male heads of family and others from their homes in Xinjiang off to these concentration camps. One of the other instruments of oppression, of torture, of control, is they put ethnic Han Chinese males in those homes. And they make it known that they're actually sleeping in the same beds as the women who have been left behind. Think about that. Think about that. What that does to the family, what that does to the people who are being incarcerated, what that does to the women, most obviously. This is being done on an unimaginably vast scale. I can go on and on and on. There's the build-out of the Belt and Road Initiative you may have heard about. This is part of the, I talked about the digital infrastructure, but the counterpart is building airfields and ports and rail systems and road networks for countries on credit. How does that work? Anybody ever heard of a payday loan? You're in the banking business, you know about this. Payday loan. That's how it works. Countries that are not going to be able to make the payments are induced to get all of this free stuff. Does that sound familiar? Free stuff. With the certain knowledge by the Chinese that they will default, and when they do, they will take possession of the assets that they've put into place. And there's not anything accidental about the countries that they have been recruiting to this so-called Belt and Road Initiative. These are countries that are in strategically interesting places. Perhaps they have precious resources, rare earth minerals, or oil, or gas, or gold, or something else. Or perhaps they're just a place from which, if you have an airfield, you can project power and control for very strategic purposes. Then there's the effort to dominate space. You know, we have a space program. We're very proud of our space program. It has been on hard times for some time, to be honest, but the Chinese have been working assiduously at not only competing with us, but exceeding us. And not just for, you know, civilian benefit of space research and exploration, for military purposes, because they understand that the high ground of space gives them a whole nother domain from which to project power on the Earth. Then there's just the old-fashioned kind of power, military power. And the Chinese have been laboring away for quite some time. Much of this, we're digressing for just a second, much of this goes back to 1991, when the then General Secretary of the Communist Party, I don't know if you remember this little guy, his name was Deng Xiaoping. And I remember vividly because at the time I was working for a Democratic senator by the name of Scoop Jackson, Henry Scoop Jackson from Washington State. And Scoop Jackson loved Deng Xiaoping. He thought he hung the moon. Principally because at the time we thought Deng Xiaoping and China were going to be a counterweight for us against the Soviet Union, which Scoop properly regarded as that time's existential threat to freedom, as did Ronald Reagan. But it was also helped along by the fact that Deng Xiaoping looked like a koala bear. He was a cute little guy. And he had this sort of happy, you know, face and effect, and lots of people fell for it. Even though he was the guy who basically pulled the trigger on the Tiananmen Square massacre. They forgave him that. Didn't want that to interfere with business. And here's the point. Deng Xiaoping introduced a strategy. It came to be known by a very pithy formulation, the hide and bide strategy. And the hide and bide strategy was basically about doing the sorts of things that I've just enumerated. I mean, you couldn't see all of those things, but the goals were pretty clear. Control the Chinese people. Project power throughout their neighborhood, including into the South China Sea and in Asia, and as far beyond as they could get away with. Dominate as many countries economically as possible, translate that, if you can, into the old-fashioned kind of raw political power and strategic power projection, and ultimately take out the United States. Force it into submission, or, if necessary, defeat it in order to control the world. That was Deng Xiaoping's strategy. But he made it clear that it was necessary to conceal that design, and that one had to be patient. This was going to take time. At the time, in 1991, China was still a very poor country. But over the decades that followed, with the help of a lot of folks in the West who didn't get the true nature of what was afoot because of the hide factor, and because it was being done sort of slowly, incrementally, as well as covertly. You know the old story about the frog in the pot of water that is boiled to death, but only by degrees, doesn't ever notice that it's being boiled, doesn't jump out of the pot. This was kind of the plan. And so what we've seen throughout these years is the successful execution of that strategy and the realization of so many of those different elements in the ways that I've just talked about. But the piece of this that has been much less obvious, even though it's more or less out there to be seen if you know to look for it, is how have they paid for all this? How have they done this? I mean, it's a richer country to be sure than it was in 1991. Make no mistake about it. It's a developed nation, for heaven's sakes. Even though, as I think it was the president pointed out the other day, 70% of the lending that is done by the World Bank for developing nations is going to communist China. 70%. That means 30% is for the entire rest of the third world. And the observation was made, wait a minute, you are a developed country. How are you getting any of this money, let alone the lion's share of it? And the answer is because they're China, and because they're a dominant power, and because they now are in control of institutions like the World Bank in important respects. So some of this might be explained by World Bank lending, but not all of it. Some of it you might think, well, maybe it's because they've got $3 trillion in foreign reserves. Maybe that's how they're financing this. Well, no, actually, they're not touching that. Or the $1.1 trillion or so in treasury bills that they often use as kind of a lever on us, leverage. No, they're not touching that either. So where are they getting the money? This is lots of expenditures, obviously, to float all of these different threats. To answer that question, I'm very proud to have with me, as was mentioned, one of my dearest friends, one of my oldest colleagues. I didn't actually know him when he was doing his thing on the Reagan National Security Council staff as the Senior Director for International Economic Affairs. I was in the Pentagon. We were working different parts of the strategy. But Roger, by virtue of his experiences earlier in his career in the Chase Manhattan Bank, as a vice president responsible for the bank's lending to the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe and Yugoslavia, and as a special assistant to the bank's chairman, a fellow by the name of David Rockefeller, for some 3 years. Roger had firsthand insights into how the Soviet Union was financing the threat that it posed to us. Relatively modest, and I don't mean to trivialize, large numbers of thermonuclear weapons as modest, except by comparison to what the Chinese are doing. And I didn't finish that thought, by the way, did I? I digressed. In addition to all of the things that I've just mentioned, we also have the Chinese investing massively in old-fashioned military power, including thermonuclear weapons. And maybe we could get into this in Q&A if you want to, but let me just give you one thought on this. Just again, a point of calibration, something you probably have not heard, but you need to think about, because it just gives you a sense of what we're up against. Probably about 5 years or so ago now, a colleague of ours, member of our Committee on the Present Danger, as a matter of fact, Dr. Phil Carver, with whom I worked in the Pentagon back in the day, brought together some of his students at my alma mater, Georgetown University, some undergrads and some graduate students, and just gave them a special project, just to see what they could do, looking at the open source material to figure out what some construction projects that were going on around the country in China might involve. And you know what they figured out? Something that had escaped the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, all of other classified collection systems. These students, under Phil Carber's leadership at Georgetown University, figured out that the Chinese had built 3,000 miles of hardened underground tunnels. 3,000 miles. I mean, that's half again as large as the distance from one coast of this country to the next. And what are they doing with 3,000 miles of hardened underground tunnels? Well, one of the things that it's reasonable to expect is they're putting thermonuclear missiles in those tunnels and running them around so that they, of course, can't be detected, but they also are very survivable. And the question then occurs, doesn't it, folks? How many of those things do they have? And we've been told by the arms control specialists that, well, they only have about 200, maybe 400 nuclear weapons. 200 to 400 nuclear weapons for 3,000 miles of tunnels? Are you kidding me? Especially now that with our help, you may have heard about all this, Bill Clinton helped the Chinese get the technology to put multiple warheads on those missiles. So they're now capable of launching on one of those missiles up to as many as 10 nuclear warheads. So are you really telling me that there may be 10 missiles? Maybe 20? In 3,000 miles of tunnels? It's not credible. But the question occurs again. How did they find the money to build 3,000 miles? Even if it's slave labor, it's still a massive undertaking. I mean, it dwarfs, I guess they got the Great Wall. They call this the underground Great Wall, by the way, the Great Wall of China, but you know, you're talking about that kind of level of effort. Where did they get the money? So to finish the point, Roger Robinson has, since he helped President Reagan destroy the Soviet Union by waging economic warfare that cut off the cash flow that supported its threats to us, and in short order resulted in the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it wasn't overnight, but when they ran out of money, it was pretty much immediate, as he'll tell you. But ever since, he's been working on trying to figure out where are the Chinese cash flow sources. How are they doing the things that are threatening us? How are they making possible the ambitions of the hide and bide strategy that are even more alarmingly now out in the public? Because the current and not so cute General Secretary of the Communist Party, the fellow that President Trump persists in talking about as his good friend, Xi Jinping, he now talks pretty openly about us as being the enemy and his mission as being to supplant us as the world's dominant power. So it's no longer just kind of something that specialists ought to be thinking about, especially in light of what the coronavirus is teaching us about the capacity for evil in this regime and the direct threat that it poses to us as a people, I would argue as a civilization. We need to know, how are they financing this? I'm going to turn it over to Roger to answer that question with you. And I just want to say thank you very much for being here to hear about it. It's great to be with you.
Well, okay. Well, thank you, Frank, and all those that made this evening possible. We're delighted to be here. My sister's been living outside of Hillsborough in East Washington since 1972. So I've been a frequent visitor to your fair state and always enjoyed myself immensely. You know, going back to Frank's talk, which wasn't long ago, he was talking about the surveillance state, he was talking about the social credit scoring, he was talking about concentration camps. He was talking about equipment that makes that all possible. Notably, surveillance cameras that are visible atop the walls of those concentration camps every few meters. This firm is also engaged in facial recognition technology of the type that round up Tibetans at train stations for their own incarceration. And the name of this poster child of human rights abuses is Hikvision. And I say it's become kind of a poster child because there's been, fortunately, a lot of mainstream press that has illuminated this issue. The Congress has taken it up on a bipartisan basis because the Uyghur camps are a throwback to a very dark time, as you can imagine. Fortunately, not death camps, but, as Frank mentioned, torturous to all involved, nonetheless. And one of the reasons that I'm here, and we came to New Hampshire, that is, the committee came earlier on, was to talk about not just some of the things that I'm going to get into in a moment, but also to talk about whether New Hampshire itself is implicated, unwittingly, in helping underwrite these kind of odious companies, PLA advanced weapons manufacturers, companies enabling egregious human rights abuses, companies that are constructing and militarizing China's illegal islands in the South China Sea, companies aiding and abetting the North Korean nuclear and missile programs that threaten the continental United States, known hackers that are constantly stealing the personal data of tens, hundreds of millions of Americans. But Hikvision has stood out, and all to the good, except for one natty detail. Wall Street didn't get the memo. They, not one index, these passive investment vehicles that I know of, with all that press, with all those onerous accusations and realities, not one has divested or shed the stock of Hikvision. Notably, MSCI, Emerging Market Index, MSCI All Country World Index, the FTSE Russell Emerging Market Index, and the list goes on. Not one. And you might ask, how can that be? Because they should have headed for the tall grass on that a good while ago. Well, they didn't in part because of China's heavy-handedness. There's a Wall Street Journal editorial that MSCI, probably the chief offender in this category, although FTSE Russell may give them a run for their money. The Chinese wanted to get in these indexes in the worst way. Why? Because There's $12 trillion of funds under management in some of these. That is, investors that track the indexes and invest in exactly what's on that list. And the Chinese know that every time one of their companies is added to that list, it's instantly and through obligation instantly purchased by those trillions of dollars of funds under management. What a racket. They go to the mainland Chinese markets, the Shenzhen and Shanghai exchanges. They load up on a couple of hundred Chinese companies to, quote, better reflect their standing in the emerging market portfolio. And they bring them back into the United States, into the portfolios of about 160, 180 million Americans, which is the total number of folks in our country that are in the capital markets. I'm not sure the exact figure, but it's got to be somewhere in that region. And they can skirt SEC regulations on disclosure and transparency, none of which is happening. They can skirt federal securities laws. There are no public company accounting requirements, the PCAOB, which is an independent auditing function set up by the United States that ensures that folks are telling the truth about the numbers to protect us, the average investor. Every American company has to go through that auditing process. Do any of the Chinese, any of the 1,000+ Chinese in our markets, have any of them been through that? No. Are any of them compliant with Dodd-Frank and Sarbanes-Oxley and other securities laws that U.S. companies have to abide by, even though there may be grousing and unhappiness? It's the law. Not one Chinese company is compliant with these federal securities laws, and especially those purchased out of the A-share market and some of sluiced in to the portfolios of scores of millions of Americans. Which brings us full stop, full circle, to New Hampshire. Because the New Hampshire Public Employees Pension System is invested in Hikvision. All of you who are in the system are holding Hikvision stock, thereby funding and supporting the concentration camps and the facial recognition technology that is oppressing the Chinese people and these minorities. You know, you're holding AVIC. What do they do for a living? China Aviation. Well, they build submarine-launched ICBMs with 30 minutes flying time to American families. They build the JL-20, I think it is, one of China's most advanced fighters, aircraft. All their unmanned vehicles and other advanced weapon systems. China Mobile, not allowed, I mean, excluded from the US market for national security concerns. But it's deemed okay for the people of New Hampshire to invest in that stock. And the list goes on. Now, we've researched your public employees pension system quite clearly, and we have these names available for you, and we have the profile of who these companies really are. Something that MSCI never did, something that the asset managers who build so-called exchange-traded funds around these indexes, they never performed the kind of diligence we're talking about. They never looked at who these companies really are, what their subsidiaries do, whether they are sanctioned by the United States, many of which are, including Hikvision. Not only is Hikvision on the blacklist of the Department of Commerce that we're not able to do business with by law, but their parent company's on there for national security reasons as well. What? How did that end up in the average portfolios of hardworking folks from New Hampshire? Well, the answer is the same way it ended up in the other 47 states that we've found so far. Only 2 states in the Union. Again, we're not done. This is a very laborious, intensive research task. So we're still working it. But so far we've only found Tennessee and Nevada that doesn't have it. So this is not a slam on New Hampshire, or even your pension systems, or your state legislators, or your governor. This is a problem that starts on Wall Street, that you are unfortunately on the receiving end of, and therefore implicated in. And that's the kind of thing we're here to talk about. Now, how much money ultimately is implicated here? I mean, how much money have the Chinese taken out of the stock and bond markets by issuing equity or stock and issuing bonds? After all, you issue a bond, you give somebody a piece of paper with an interest rate and a maturity date, and they give you $1 billion, $2 billion, or something like this. We have to remember that these are in effect pieces of paper in exchange for money. Best we know, something in the neighborhood of $1.5 trillion to as much as $3 trillion. That's over 4 times our $700 billion defense budget. That's the kind of walking around money that seems to be in limitless supply with the Chinese. How do they compromise all of the countries in Southeast Asia, buying them up, the Cambodias, the Thailands? I mean, how do they practically own the continent of Africa? I mean, you see these guys recruiting espionage agents in our universities, things like the Confucius Institutes, the 1,000 Talents program. They have a very elaborate effort, not to mention hundreds of billions in intellectual property theft and technology theft. A massive military buildup that, as Frank pointed out, is now a peer competitor with the United States. Hypersonic weapon systems, ever more accurate ICBMs. They're constructing 5 classes of ballistic missile submarines at the same time. There's no precedent for that in the world. It's usually 1 at a time. I don't know that there's ever been 2, much less 5. So, where's the money coming from? They have $3 trillion in hard, remember, their currency is not convertible. It's not like the yen or the dollar or the euro. They're trying to institute and make it a medium of exchange, the yuan or the RMB, the renminbi as it's called. But it's not near there yet. I think of the $5 trillion a day in foreign exchange. Dollars settle 95, 97%. As I remember, the yuan was about 1%. They got a long way to go, fortunately, to catch up with the supremacy of the dollar as the global currency, the reserve currency of the world. Thank goodness, because every time these guys make gains, you can be sure the leverage, that crushing leverage, is at the ready. So, we have a circumstance where for 20, 25 years, the Chinese have been coming into our capital markets, enjoying this incredible free lunch program where they don't have to comply with disclosure requirements of the SEC, like their American counterparts. Forget federal securities laws, they seemingly don't apply. I heard tell that they were waived by President Obama, although I can't say that I've nail that down, but I have heard this. Because again, you want to ask the question, what's up here? But whether it's Obama or not, it's a reality. And then, of course, there are these other issues. Human rights, our vital security interests. Since when are we positioned to underwrite this incredible array of threats against our way of life and everything we hold dear? Who was asleep at the switch? Where is the chairman of the SEC, Jay Clayton? Where is the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States? And not just the current one. Where have they been over decades now? This has only gone on about, I think, 20, 25 years that the Chinese had a substantial presence in our capital markets. But you can imagine when they thought that this was offline in effect, a sacrosanct area that they could exploit, where we have no screening mechanism. We have no federal diligence. We don't have our intelligence community engaged with the SEC in trying to figure out who these folks really are. Even in the open source, much less the classified material we have access to snake check these guys. Nothing. We have it for trade. We have a committee on foreign investment in the United States that's recently been strengthened by something called the FIRMA legislation. We care about Chinese investment in the United States so they don't buy our most precious technology companies like they were able to do with impunity before, or buy land right next to a sensitive military facility. You know, we're picking up on this at long last, but even that's an imperfect system, but at least it's a system. And it's an interagency process, and we review those deals and make sure that they're consonant with U.S. national security interests. Where's the committee on the capital markets, which houses over 60% of the world's liquidity? Our capital markets are larger than the rest of the world's combined. We have all the money. They are desperate for the money in dollars and are facing liquidity crises all the time. And think about the coronavirus and what that's done to them. They already had a growth rate that's been in steady decline. Look at it now. So that need for our dough is more intense than it's ever been. But where are the safeguards? Where's abiding by the rules? Why are they receiving preferential treatment? You don't have to be a hawk. You don't have to be a China basher. You don't have to have draconian solutions like saying every Chinese company needs to be delisted from US exchanges. Or these guys should all be sanctioned, no Americans should be investing in them, and there should be a complete decoupling. Now, there's some people that believe that, but from a practical point of view, I don't think that's on. So that's not what folks like me that uncovered this problem are advocating. Because if you did, no chance of getting anything done within the executive branch or Capitol Hill. You're up against $40 to $60 trillion of funds under management on Wall Street. They don't take this kind of thing lying down. I mean, they invented the heavy-handed lobby. You can count on that. So it's not happening. But if you go with a more market approach, if you go with just a sensible set of requests, like, hey, the Chinese should comply with federal securities laws. How radical is that? Or why are they receiving preferential treatment to their American corporate counterparts? Or why don't they have to disclose that they're building and militarizing islands in the South China Sea, and they might be sanctioned someday, and it's a risk to their share value and corporate reputation, and to anybody that invests in them, and should be properly disclosed. That's what so-called material risk disclosure is about. Why not have them obey the rules? Oh no. No, they get a sweetheart deal. And that sweetheart deal is providing the wherewithal for the very predations that Frank regaled you with earlier tonight. After all, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, this is about money. You don't get very far without it, as we all know. And the Chinese are happy for us to concentrate on the trade portfolio. They can do sanction wars, tariff wars all day long, and have proved it. Well, they don't like the new scrutiny of technology. They don't like the new strengthened CFIUS, as it's called, Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. They're annoyances, but they figure they can finesse it. But the one issue that they can't finesse, the one issue that's never seen the light of day, the one issue that before March of last year, when I started to go forward with our research findings, I can't find one article, one congressional hearing, one think tank agenda item, one interagency meeting of the executive branch, one cocktail conversation in Washington about the national security and human rights dimensions of China's presence in the U.S. capital markets. What? We missed that 40 to 60 trillion, did we? Or is it that it wasn't supposed to see the light of day? Because it is the mother lode. It is where China lives or dies. You want to talk about a thin cushion. These guys don't have a cushion. They have a real estate bubble that would keep us and their own leadership up at night, every night. It's so scary. They've got a debt crisis that's now 300% of GDP. And how much of that's bad loans? Lord knows. Nobody knows, except probably the Communist Party. And they're not talking. But it's got to be massive. And think of what the coronavirus is doing for those over-leveraged Chinese companies that borrow too much and built cities that nobody lives in and all that. There's no cash flow. There's a bailout going to happen there that just doesn't quit. So what happens to their growth rate, et cetera, et cetera? So they don't have the cushion. We think that these guys are 10 feet tall, that they're an immutable juggernaut on the geopolitical landscape of the world, that we're going to be living with for our children's 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 children, to go back to at least the Reagan sentiment, that they're going to be a permanent player. You hear people saying, well, let's see how China's doing 20 and 50 years from now. There better not be 20 to 50 years, or you're going to lose your way of life. This isn't the old days. This is a high-velocity digital world. It is in fast forward, as you all know, instantaneous, globalized, digitized. Problems happen fast, not just good times. So that's not on either. Now, again, this doesn't have to be radical surgery. This doesn't have to be something that folks talk about, whether you're some China basher or whether you're just some mindless hawk or whether you are have something against the Chinese people in a racist or other way. Really, that's not where we are. any more than we thought that Russians were inferior or something. I mean, you know, look, these are authoritarian regimes, in some cases, as more recently, totalitarian police states that are dedicated to destroying our way of life and our democratic institutions. Period. And if somebody can show me that that's not the case, I have an open mind. I'm listening. Now we can go back and talk a little bit about the Soviets, and we should, maybe, if anybody's interested. I can certainly do it in the Q&A. But I did want to preserve some time, you know, to do that for those interested as to how that evil empire went down. And that was about cash flow. And that was about the West funding them. So as different as the Soviet Union was, is in its anemic, brittle, sort of one-lane economy that it had, oil and gas, versus this vast, diversified economy, totally integrated into the global network like China, I get their differences, unrecognizable almost differences. But there are a couple of things that are the same. These are totalitarian police states, and they are living largely off of us and our money. Unwittingly, unknowingly, undisclosed, which I have a bone to pick with the SEC about, putting it mildly, because all of us should at least have a right to know. I mean, what's up with not knowing that you're invested in a US sanctioned company? Is that a material risk? Gee, would that, if I told you that you were about to invest in a US sanctioned company where it's illegal for Americans to do business with a company, don't you think you might want to know that before you put your hard-earned money in there? Don't you think that that, gee, represents a kind of risk that you need to be aware of before you put your dough in there? Obviously, yes. Is any of that disclosed today? No. I mean, I seem to have a smirk on my face, but it's really not a laughing matter. I mean, it's a pathetic display. So, we got a lot of work to do here, but there's hope. I mean, as recalcitrant and determined as Wall Street is not to move on this, the 50 states can make a big difference. That's why we're going state to state. Because you can go to your state legislators, you can go to your governors, and say, out of that old movie Network, which is an oldie and goodie, I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm not going to be invested in ICBMs targeting my families. I'm not going to be invested in concentration camps. I mean, what the hell is this? And don't tell me that you bought an index and therefore it's not your responsibility. You made the decision to hold it, to buy that index with those Chinese companies and those Russian sanctions violators. You know, this idea that you get a free pass because it's in a Wall Street index, and that's so what? Makes it okay? Because they didn't do their homework? And they just want to collect the fees? And they don't give a damn about where your money ends up, is the truth. So, this is a matter of education, it's a matter of awareness, and fortunately, we've got a lot of ammo on our side. You know, follow the rules, please. This should be fall off a log easy, but it's not, because the biggest money in the world's in this game. And the biggest money in the world is us. And that money is yours. And therefore we have a right to safeguard it, to safeguard our country, and to safeguard our fundamental values. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I should I speak now. So anyway, Lily Tang Williams I moved here actually 3 months ago from Colorado. But why did I leave China? So I understand totally what you're talking about. When it comes to American public, some media, just some investors, they really have no idea sometimes what CCP, China's Communist Party, is capable of. But I live under them for 24 years of my life. So I know. So I thank you for doing this and traveling around the country to educate the American public. My question to you is that how did we even get to this point? There are lots of Americans don't know what you're talking about. They invest blindly, they trust the financial advisors, and there are lots of Chinese who leave this country or inside China, they don't know what you're talking about. They have no idea how their government operate, but they just know they are very brutal, and they have one thing in mind: money, power, control. And we don't want them to come to the United States. So I thank you, and you tell me what is the percentage of Americans, regular public, and the companies are aware of this, what you're talking about. That's just so dangerous.
Good question. I don't know whether either of us have a specific answer for you on the percentages, but we certainly can talk about how we got here. Do you want to take a first cut?
Well, the answer is very few. I mean, again, to my knowledge, we were the first to surface this research in March of last year. And we had done a large report, a 105-pager that took about a year and a half to produce. I can't get into too many details as to what the circumstances of that report were, but it never really saw the light of day. It didn't get the kind of traction in government and elsewhere that we hoped it would. And we were at risk of seeing this thing buried for another 25 years. And that's just not on. So the point is that, and the problem is, that there's a skill mix issue here. That is to say that the national security community is very insecure on the subject of global finance and the markets. They're not generally Wall Street types. And when you start talking about indexes and exchange-traded funds, the eyes glaze over a little bit, and they're worried about taking public positions on this because they're just not comfortable in that rather sophisticated, arcane world, which is, by the way, not that sophisticated and arcane. It's common sense, is the truth of the matter. But they worry about it. In the case of Wall Street types, they see the national security community as sort of bad news guys and gals. They are sanctions people. They take action that are disruptive to the markets. They contract their investable community, their investable universe. That's their lingo. That we contract their investable universe, meaning we limit the companies that they can invest in when we paint them with brushes like human rights abusers and national security violators and the like. So you have to get folks that have a solid background on global finance and Wall Street combined with high-level national security credentials. And sadly, I've come across, you know, you can count on one or two hands in 44 years how that has gone down. It's just not a cadre of professionals that we need to develop. I mean, this is the 21st century, and it's about the money, for goodness sake, and we're just not geared up with the professional staffing, if you will, to get a better handle on this. So that's part of it.
Let me add just one other piece of this, and that is, it's not just that we're not paying attention. We've been misled. And this is, by the way, not a partisan critique. Governments of both Republican and Democratic parties have pursued this line. I mentioned my old boss, Scoop Jackson. Even during the Reagan years, we were persuaded that we were going to have a partner in China. If they got rich, they would help us against Russia, the Soviet Union, and after the Soviet Union went away, if we just invested more in them, if we just traded more with them, if we just migrated enough of our productive capacity to them, if we just did enough business with them, if we just got them richer, they would become more benign. They'd become more like us. They'd become members in good standing of the international community, on and on and on. This is, I think, come to be known as globalism, but it has become kind of a mantra. And the thing that was so insidious about it is that it basically fed into a larger sort of lack of awareness about the real world. Roger just talked about common sense. Common sense tells you whether you're talking about the playground or you're talking about international politics. Bullies thrive on the absence of countervailing pressure. They just do. And, you know, everybody's had some experience of this. Somebody's picking on you, somebody's calling you names, somebody's bullying you, pushing you around. You push back, and the behavior generally, you know, abates. You don't, it gets worse. It's just that simple. So it's common sense, but we mostly have just stopped paying attention to it until very recently. And I want to impress upon you one other thing. We're here to talk to you about what we can do about this. Some of the things that we think you can do about this, you personally can help us do about this. When we were here, what it was, 6 weeks ago, were a harder thing to say if was possible. It was, you know, the idea that we would disengage from China, for example, remove the kinds of supply chain dependencies that we currently have. I think mention was made by Jay about our dependence on China for medicine, for heaven's sakes. Medicine that we need right now. And guess what? It isn't coming. Certainly not in the quantities that we need. Partly because the Chinese are keeping it for themselves, and partly, I think, it's the weapon that one of our colleagues, Rosemary Gibson, has been warning about for a couple of years. 6 weeks ago, folks, you would not have found probably 10 people in this country who would say, we can actually change that. Not only we can, we have to change that. One of them was Donald Trump, to his credit, but there weren't many others. Today, coronavirus has changed that conversation entirely. So the things that we think we can do about this, now that our eyes are beginning to open to this reality, now that the information that Roger, and when he says two hands, I can tell you, you're looking at basically the only guy I know who has both the national security chops and the finance chops. And we're busily trying to figure out how to replicate Roger's experience and skill sets, and his research is indispensable. I didn't mention the two companies or two outfits that he runs. RWR Advisory Group, been instrumental in doing this research, and the Prague Security Studies Institute.
It's just the capacity for tonight.
That's a 501c3 operation. So these are places that need your support, by the way. So anyway, thank you for that really important question. Our sponsor has a question.
So when we met 6 weeks ago, you had indicated
how much of the New Hampshire retirement system was invested in 5 worst actors in China. Can you share that with the group?
Well, the numbers may not be as large as you would think they would be, given the amounts of money that we're talking about. But they're not trivial, and in the size of your pension portfolio, they stand out. You want to talk about the exact numbers? Do you remember them off the top of your head?
No.
It's millions of dollars. It's millions of dollars. And it's 6 or 7 companies, as I recall. It's been 6 weeks since we focused on this. In the intervening period, by the way, though,
the Chinese.
this is just the Chinese. The Russians are there too. We've taken this show on the road to Iowa. We came here. Went to South Carolina. We went to Nevada. We went to Tennessee. We went to Maryland, Virginia, and California. In each of these places, we've tried to engage with people who can do something about this problem. As Roger said, in Nevada and Tennessee, we discovered to our pleasure that they actually don't have the problem. Their public pension funds are not invested in the Chinese. And so when we met with some of your state legislators here earlier today, and we met with them a couple of weeks ago, we said, you can do this too. We would really appreciate your help. Well, in 2 respects. We appreciate your help supporting what we do, quite frankly, but we also would appreciate your help in conveying to you, the people who represent you, of hundreds of people who represent you, that this is not acceptable, that you want this fixed, and we think that can happen. Yes, sir.
Well, speaking of pharmaceutical manufacturing in China, I can tell you everything about it. I actually had a conversation with Donald Trump about it about 4 years ago. Probably I could list off the number of congressmen, United States senators, even some being medical doctors, who legitimately had no idea what I was talking about. They would start to come back to me with something about right to try or something like that, and I said, no, all of our drugs are moving to China. And I think I would just be legitimately looked at like I had 2 heads. Like, it was just unbelievable to them that we don't make penicillin in this country and many life-saving drugs. That being said, I think that I've had a lot of trouble talking to people about stuff like that. And you mentioned we don't have the right people or the most educated people in there. So what are you guys doing about, you know, the current administration, what have you, about getting the right people in there? Because I have met very few people, whether it be the FDA, quite frankly, the FDA did know what was going on, and they actually thought it was funny. That they were basically sending all of our jobs over to India. They were closing down plants in Puerto Rico. My understanding was it was because it was much more fun to have a weekend in San Juan than spend 2 weeks in Mumbai, India, and get sick. And that's really why you saw, you know, FDA parking spaces out in front of, just to let everybody here know, 50 to 60% of your drugs used to come from Puerto Rico. Now probably about 50 to 60% of your drugs come from India. 90% of what we call the API, that's the active pharmaceutical ingredient, is produced in China. So even the Indians who are making the final product of your drug rely on China for the underlying active ingredients that goes into the drug. So they really pretty much control everything except a few drugs. So there's the ones that you always hear about that are the most expensive, like insulin. We still make that in this country. So that being said, what is your organization doing to get those right people into those spots? Because that's, and for someone who's fairly politically connected in New Hampshire, ran for Congress, talked about this the entire time, really got very little play, or to get people to even understand what I was talking about. What are you doing about getting those people into these right areas, whether it be the SEC or the FDA or what have you?
Great question. I just have one for you. How did you know all this stuff?
Well, I've been involved in pharmaceutical manufacturing for about 25 years. So when you start to see plant after plant closing in Puerto Rico and going over to India, so I was part of a worldwide manufacturing and distributor here in Manchester. And probably in about 1999, 1998, India actually became our largest territory besides the United States. So I had a firsthand, you know,
Thank you.
front row seat.
Gosh, I wish I knew you 4 years ago. We might have been able to do something about it. I only learned about this from Rosemary Gibson's book about 6 or 7 months ago. And I think practically nobody else, despite your best efforts and frankly hers, her book is called China RX, which is basically about the vulnerability that is yawning and now obvious in terms of this dependency. I'd be interested in talking more about you about this, because I thought insulin was also now an endangered species here. But the point is, this is a microcosm, ladies and gentlemen, a particularly horrifying, egregious microcosm, but still just a microcosm of what has been happening to us for several decades across our entire industrial base. The same basic technique. The Chinese decide to target an industry. They undermine our productive competitiveness by using slave labor and other techniques, just buying in, to essentially put our kinds of manufacturers, whatever it is, out of business. more often than not, they'll move the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel, the productive capacity to China, and then they'll start producing it in earnest and dominate the market and set the price much higher and create this dependency. And it's on a whole host of issues. It's rare earth minerals, it's flat screens, it's chips, it's steel, it's on and on. And the point is, the coronavirus has put this in sharp relief. And I found anecdotally, I was on Breitbart Radio last night with Congressman Louis Gohmert, and we were talking about this, and the host, Rebecca, said, you know, this is the issue that has really galvanized her audience. When they find out about this is so obviously intolerable that we can get it fixed. So I've got some thoughts on what we can do about the personnel thing. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah. My capacity tonight is chairman and co-founder of the Prague Security Studies Institute, which allows me to speak a little more freely than the corporate side. But leave it to say that at our think tank, which we have both a Washington operation as well as one in Prague, you know, our lead programmatic activity is training on this brand of economic and financial warfighting. I mean, we are trying to take the brightest and the best of students, graduate students and others, young professionals, and encourage them to think about this as even a full-up career path. The reason being that it's just a matter of time, and hopefully a short amount of time, that these types of national security and human rights material risk factors are going to have to be integrated into the compliance departments and the risk management departments of Wall Street. They're going to lose this battle. They think they're going to win, but they're not. It's too highly charged politically, and we can beat them. We can beat them for the reasons I mentioned. If they were following the rules and were good stewards, that's one thing, but they're not. So leave it to say that it's a matter of educating talented, friendly folks in the administration, which we've tried to do, to bring them around. And they're receptive, but it's pockets. It's not the show. We're still got pockets of support, but it's not across the board as it needs to be. And then working on generations of young professionals to pick up this thing in earnest and never let the money be put asunder again.
On that point about the administration, one of the good news items, folks, depending on where you sit, I guess, but if this has moved you at all, one of the things that I'm particularly excited about is that President Trump has just in the past 3 weeks, I think, entrusted the Office of White House Personnel, Presidential Personnel Office, they call it, PPO, to a fellow by the name of John McEntee, who you may remember from the campaign up here, was one of his right-hand men at the time. And McEntee's brief is to get rid of the deep staters and the never-Trumpers and the Republican establishment guys who are completely comfortable with this kind of approach and put in place people who are with the Trump program. So I think Roger's exactly right in terms of what we need to do to be creating a cadre of people who have the kinds of skill sets that he does, but there's now an opportunity to have them serve. And I think the chances are that we'll actually see some real progress made on this front, hopefully, and many others as well as a result. Anybody else?
Yes, can I make a comment?
Please.
Hi, I just want to make mention, I've been going to Africa now for 26 years, and in Kenya particularly. So every year we go, it used to be a little more, pretty rural. But now the city has grown, and the Chinese have heavily invested in Africa. And so within 1 year, a year and a half, they put in like an 8 major lane highway from the city. They're just building all of this infrastructure in Kenya. By the way, they're destroying the national park. It used to be 144 million acres. It's something like, I don't know, 84,000 acres. They're just decimating the wildlife in Africa. It's opened up the door for all sorts of poachers and everything like that. But a striking thing is when you go on every television set in every hotel, it's all Chinese. It's all Chinese. It's amazing. And then one thing they promised the country that if they would let them build this infrastructure would create all sorts of jobs for the local Kenyan folks. Well, it didn't. They shipped in prisoners from China to build the roads. So there was one job that went to the Kenyan folks. And multiple rapes happened during that process, where women were raped horribly. And you know, there are all sorts of lawsuits going on now with that. So just having seen that personally, you know, after going over there, working on mission work and building a hospital and doing different works there, it just is astounding. You just don't even think about it, you know, because we're so consumed in our own political world that we're very distracted how they're dominating, you know, the world. They're dominating in so many areas, and Africa is a very big area.
Well, this is such an important testimony, and it's not just true in Kenya. I mean, what the resentment that is now rampant throughout Africa, because exactly the same thing has happened in country after country after country, is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for the people of Africa to free themselves of this, but they need our help. It's an opportunity for us as well. And one of the things that we'd be happy to talk to you about offline, if you'd like to, is some of the things that we're doing to try to give the people of Africa options and to help the government of the United States make those options available without having to outlay immense amounts of taxpayer money. Things that could be really transformative and could win back for the West, or for Western civilization, if you will, hundreds of millions of people who are now really at the mercy of the Chinese, and by the way, the Islamists too. I mean, it's a very, very troubling situation. I just wanted to add to this one other point. When we look at this appetite that China has to dominate the world, and you've heard, you know, another testimonial from somebody who says what she personally experienced 24 years ago is still happening, and is happening in Technicolor with these new capabilities. What I really want to just leave you with is, when you look at what you've heard tonight, not only about how they're making all this possible, but what it is doing to the people of China themselves. Just reflect for a minute about how it could possibly be that a government that treats its own people so badly is going to be very gentle or kind or considerate of ours. And the chances of that are zero. So we have an opportunity here, folks, and I hope we've given you enough, at least to start the process of thinking about becoming engaged in this. We'd love to have your help with the Committee on the Present Danger of China. We've got ways in which you can contribute. If you can't participate more actively yourselves, that would be appreciated. But the point is, every one of us has a stake in this. Every single one of us. And we can do better at it with the support of folks like yourselves. And we're so appreciative, again, Kurt, to you and to Jay, and to the team who helped really engineer this event, BJ and company. Thank you, and I'm going to turn it back over to the man who made this all possible initially, Jay Lucas. Thank you very much.
I am so delighted that we've had these gentlemen up here tonight, because this is the issue of our lifetime. This is the issue about freedom. And having this conversation here in New Hampshire, where I know we can stand up for freedom in the live free or die state, is just so vitally important. On a personal note, it's also important to me and our family, because our older son is actually in the South China Sea now, flying the F-18 on the US Reagan. And he's in harm's way, along with so many other brave people who are there. And I think from a military point of view, but also from an economic point of view, and all of the issues that have been raised tonight, we have a chance to, in my opinion, the most important thing that we can do for the Chinese people and for the freedom of Americans in the next generation is to do everything we possibly can to topple this corrupt and dangerous regime, the Communist Party in China, so that we free the world for the next generation. So I thank you all for coming tonight, and really appreciate you being here. You can see the folks in the back who, if you want to register to support, I see them waving their hands up there. And so thank you very much. Good night.